Thank you very much, Michelle Ngele. And yes, it is time for the political point where we weigh in on what is happening politically. And we do know that the Jubilee party launched their manifesto yesterday. We're expecting that NASA is going to be launching theirs today. And that is going to form the fulcrum of what we're going to be discussing right here on the political point. A quick reminder that you're welcome to participate. Michelle Ngele is going to be looking at what's coming through via social media. If you'd like to call in, we're going to open up the phone lines and give you an opportunity to also weigh in on what you'd like us to, or rather what we're discussing this morning, and let us know what your thoughts are as we continue with the discussion. Now, I'll go straight to introducing the panel that we have here this morning. And to my extreme left, we have Dismas Mokua, who is a political risk analyst. And we also have Honorable Irungu Kang'ata, Member of Parliament for Kiharu constituency. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We were expecting Honorable Peter Kaluma and also John Kagushia, who is a political analyst as well, to join us in studio. But as we continue to wait, we'll continue with the conversation. A quick reminder, you're welcome to participate. Let's start with you, Dismas, on your take in looking at the Jubilee manifesto that was launched yesterday. There's all sorts of things that have been said. Some have said it's merely the same thing that was launched in 2013, just changed a little bit. Others have said, yes, it is what they expected. It does address what Kenyans need today. Your take on that?
Well, in my view, what I expected yesterday was actually not a manifesto from Jubilee. What I expected was a scorecard for them to tell us when they took office about 4.5 years ago, this is what they promised and this is what they've delivered. And then we have a conversation around the variance. Obviously, there's no government that will promise A and then achieve 100% at the end of, they say, 4.5 years or 5 years. So really what people were looking forward to yesterday was a scorecard.
But one might argue that the scorecard has been done over time. Remember, we've been having the State House addresses that have been done by Jubilee, basically looking at different parts of their promises, devolution, corruption and all that, where they actually gave a scorecard of what they've done.
No, but that has not been very visible. When you're talking about a scorecard, let's take an example of economic diplomacy. Because President Kenyatta says that over the last 4.5 years, he succeeded in economic diplomacy. What we expected that to be broken down into saying, how many countries did we target where we had a trade deficit and now we have a trade surplus? So that, you know, you have clear figures. If it's about food security, Jubilee should have told us when we took over, these are the figures we had. Like, for instance, about maize production in Kenya, this is the number of bags we are producing. This is the number of bags we produce today, and this is the reason for the variance. Nowhere in the world do you have a sitting government coming up with a manifesto. Because essentially, what is a manifesto? A manifesto is a list of development priorities, policy priorities that you intend to achieve when you're in office. So when you've been in office for the last 5 years, you actually need to tell us using numbers, because numbers don't lie. You need to tell us numbers of what you've been able to achieve. Like, for instance, when you talk about employment creation, depending on whom you speak with, we are told that Kenya, we are suffering about 70% unemployment rate. And it goes up to 80% for the Kenyan youth. So one would have expected for us to be told, when we took over, we were creating on average, say, 400,000 jobs. And right now, we are creating 800,000 jobs. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference. There's a growth. Because that's the only time you'll be able to give an appreciation. Okay. You know, at the end of, you recall when you're in a high school, people used to compare, what did you get in term 1, term 2, and term 3, so that you can see some gradual progression.
All right. Irungu Kang'ata, do you agree that possibly what we needed is more of a scorecard as opposed to new promises or promises that possibly have just been repackaged?
No, a scorecard was given yesterday, unless I didn't hear my president talking, right? For instance, he did talk about electricity connection. Since 1963 up to the year 2013, when Jubilee leadership came into power, they did say that the connections were about 2-point-something million. Mm-hmm. But from 2013 to 2017, the connections are now about 6 million. They did also talk about foreign direct investments, and figures were given how many billions have been invested in this country as a result of what my colleague is terming as economic diplomacy. Also, about job creation, for instance, we had Cabinet Secretary in charge of ICT, Mr. Musheru, Joe Musheru. He did give figures of how many jobs exist in our internet space. And to the best of my knowledge, I had him give a figure of about 750,000 jobs, which the only problem is that most youths don't know of those opportunities. And what the government has done is to open up a website they are calling ajira.com, which essentially is a platform where young people can be told of those opportunities. They can even be trained. In fact, we saw yesterday a link at Kenyatta University where students were being taught and given those ideas on how they can leverage on those opportunities which exist in our blogosphere. So therefore, I disagree with my colleague to the extent he's saying that figures were not given. They were given. For instance, we had about how many kilometers of roads are being tarmacked compared to the previous regimes. In fact, what is being done today in terms of road construction is quite a humongous amount of resources being devoted in that arena, to the extent, even if you were to combine Kenyatta 1, Moi, and Kebaki regime in terms of road connection, you cannot even reach the amount of roads that are being done by the Jubilee government. So figures were given. Okay. And finally, I want to correct one statement my colleague has talked about. He is saying that Kenya has about 70 or 80% rate of unemployment among the youth. No country in this world can survive such kind of a high unemployment rate. There will be an instant revolution.
Okay. Dismiss your comments to that, given that apparently Jubilee did give some figures. But of course, one of the things that glares at us as Kenyans is the fact that despite the fact the figures are given, rare is the time that we hear an open admission that here we have failed, and then reasons why we have failed.
You see, that's the reason why you say that we need to be given variances. I haven't said that no figures were given yesterday. There were so many figures which were given yesterday, but the figures are not coherent. Like, for instance, when you're talking about 10,000 kilometers of roads which have been done, they should tell us what is the promise that we made when you took over, and what have you achieved? And when you're talking about the road construction in Kenya, that is so disruptive that if there was 10,000 kilometers being done, you would actually feel it. Like, for instance, on Gong Road, you see there's a bit of construction going on. And if it was so massive, every Kenyan would actually be able to feel it. You do not need to go to a website, like, say, for instance, Ajira or Delivery, for you to appreciate what Jubilee has done. You should feel it in your kitchen when you're having a conversation. Like, for instance, what one would have expected is for the president and his deputy to tell us everything we've achieved for the last 5 years, the cumulative effect in your kitchen table conversation. In the evening, when you're planning your budget with your family members and you're looking at your kitchen budgets, has this government actually improved on that? And one of the things that the president admitted, which I think was a rare moment, he accepted that, in fact, the rents in Kenya are very high. And he said he needs another 5 years to address the housing stock. Now, what one would have expected is the president to tell us, when you took over, we promised you we are going to give you 500,000 jobs annually. And how many have we given to date? Because if you want to reduce the rent cost in Kenya, you work on the supply side. And you see right now, there's nothing being done on the supply side. If you're looking for an upmarket house in Nairobi, you'll be spoiled for choice. But if you're looking for houses for the middle-income persons or the low-income group, that is not available. Those are the figures we need for comparisons. And at the end of the day, really, when any administration comes into office and they're doing all these grand projects, they're supposed to make your life more affordable, more exciting. For instance, when you talk about road construction, then you say that you are working hard on infrastructure, and on the same day, when you're launching your manifesto, there's a bridge collapsing somewhere. So people begin to ask, in as much as you've done something, and it would be very naive for us to sit here and have a conversation and say, Jubilee has done absolutely nothing. They made a lot of progress. But what's the quality of that work? Because the number of projects they are doing, like, for instance, the Sigiri Bridge is collapsing. So those are the things that we needed to interrogate. When you look at the SGR, it's a priority project, but how much money was spent on that project, and did we really do a very solid feasibility study to ensure that the resources are well spent with equity? And again, Mike, when you look at performance of governments, what Jubilee has been able to do is not even the bare minimum to survive. It's slightly below what was expected. They've done nothing which you can shout and say, Eureka. For instance, the president said yesterday that there is a free maternal health care. Right now, if you go to an hospital in Kenya, a public hospital, You will not get the free maternal health care for several reasons. The nurses are on strike. And the county governors would say, we have a problem communicating with the national government. A number of resources which are supposed to go to the county governments are still being retained at the national level. So there are so many questions to be asked. And for us to grow as a nation, it's important for our leadership to accept liability. If the plans have not worked, they need to tell us that these are our plans, they did not work for these reasons. And every human being would understand when something has not worked.
Okay. Honorable Irongo Kangata, something that Dismas mentions is to do with quality. At the end of the day, we can have a very fantastic presentation done by, on PowerPoint or whatever, or go to some website and look at what the government has achieved and all that. But at the end of the day, what the Mwananchi, especially majority of the Mwananchi, cares about is how much flour is costing once they get to the till. What they care about is whether they're able to afford their transport to their place of work and just literally just get by. Looking at the manifesto of 2013 and comparing it with now, it all feels like it's something that it's a pie in the sky. When it comes to the normal Mwananchi, they don't feel the effect, the quality of that particular manifesto.
One of the problems that we are having when it comes to auditing the performance of this government is the issue of the fact that we have a divorce system where the problems of governance are being attributed to the national government. And we need to clearly demarcate that role. For instance, if you are seated, let's say, in a place called Karachunyu, and you have a road which you cannot access, for instance, which is coming into your village, instead of blaming your governor, you start thinking it is Uhuru's problems that has made that road not to be let's say gravel, for instance, without you differentiating that now under the devolved system, we have roads that are devolved where you are supposed to ask your governor. We have other roads which are for the national government. So I would urge Kenyans first to understand and know that going forward, some of the problems that affect their own lives, some can be attributed to the national government, some can be attributed to the county government. A good example is like, for instance, so many roads. I think now about 60% of roads that we have in Kenya, classified roads, are now under county government. So don't blame Uhuru Kenyatta when you have
that's on roads, but remember the issue I mentioned is mainly to do with things like flour, food, basic commodities that we expect that the price
Again, also I want to bring in the aspect of devolution. Agriculture is also devolved, for instance. So therefore, a good innovative governor ought to come up with ways of increasing the supply, for instance, of basic commodities in terms of the output of the agriculture. A good governor can invest more in agriculture. There is a higher output of, let's say, flour, and when you have a higher output of flour, and then we are not going to experience these problems we are having, for instance. So take any other good parameter like health, which he has cited. Again, health is also devolved. The current stalemate of nurses, surely you ought not to blame the government. According to the Constitution, according to the various instruments that we have established in Parliament, it is governors who employs nurses. They are the ones who are supposed to come up with a payment structure. They pay you how much. So therefore, why do you have
could this be the problem that we have in this country, because we are forever blaming? Nobody ever takes a responsibility for where we are today.
You know, Mike, it's interesting what Irungu is talking about. In Kenya, the buck stops with the president. We have 47 county governments and 1 national government. So the buck stops with President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta.
So for everything?
Wait a minute. The buck stops with President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. The national government comes up with policy where they don't have direct resources, like for instance in agriculture or healthcare. They've got the primary responsibility of creating a policy infrastructure that translates to deliverables. Like for instance, when you're talking about food security, it's actually unacceptable for Irungia to say, if there is a food crisis in Kenya, you look for the 47 county governors and you start blaming them. While you've got a Minister of Agriculture in Nairobi, if we've got a healthcare crisis, we need to ask Dr. Mailu Rather that out of the national budget that he has, how much money is he retaining at the headquarters and how much money has gone to devolution? When you speak to a number of governors, they tell you that the budget they get for devolution, and again, you know, it depends on who you speak with. The governors give you one figure, the treasury gives you a different figure. So really, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the president. When you're going to vote on August 8th, you'll be voting for one president, and that's where everything stops. And if you're claiming that your government has been a success and there's a food crisis, okay, assuming that the governors have failed on giving us food, but the president himself and the deputy came with an intervention saying, because we don't have unga in Kenya, let's go and import. So they've already subsidized middlemen instead of giving a subsidy to farmers. Now we have unga, which is supposed to be retailing at 90 bob. If you go to any supermarket this morning, you'll be very lucky if you can actually get access to that unga. So assuming the governors have failed, let's say they failed with a lot of success, but the interventions being pursued by the president, have they been a success? I saw the other day the deputy president complaining that there are some traders in Kenya who are holding the 90 shillings unga. So what is the president doing to ensure that no trader in Kenya holds that unga? So, you know, as a nation, for us to make progress, the way you've indicated, leaders in Kenya must take liability. Okay. And it's only a strong person who takes liability. Who takes liability.
I'll pause you there because we want to now look at what is happening on social media. And we do have Michelle Ngele on standby there. And a quick reminder that now the phone lines are open. Should you want to participate in this conversation, give us a call. Over to you, Michelle.
Michael, Kenyans following the conversation on social media. Remember, the hashtag is Morning Express KTN. You can take part in this conversation. So let's see what they're saying. Victor Peter here is saying, Jubilee has achieved some, not all. Some were previous government's projects. We have Richard Wasike here saying, these are just mouth promises to help them get to office for a second term. And we have Evelyn Kasina here saying, does Irungu know how many people lost jobs and went on early retirement? What jobs is he talking about? Something that Irungu Kangata will be responding to in just a few moments. And Eve here, Minute continues and says, oh, that's the same question. Does Irungu know how many people lost their jobs? We have Dennis Nyakeriga saying, a manifesto is obsolete if the issue of corruption is not addressed. And that is a conversation that Erica, or rather Dennis also takes further and says, did the manifesto rather have anything to do with corruption? So that is what is going on social media. We have Richard here saying, I'm a common mwananchi, but if my life is not easy going, then the blame is on the government. Other countries care for its citizens as well. So do keep that conversation going. The hashtag is Morning Express KTN, but also here on Morning Express, we are also giving you live traffic updates even as you head to work. Let's take a look at what's happening on our roads this morning. So let's take a look at the Museum Hill. The situation there seems quite bumper to bumper heading into town, but the situation is pretty easy flowing if you're headed the opposite direction. So quite a bit of traffic there heading into town from Museum Hill. Let's see what else we have here. We have Limuru Road and Forest Road. Things seem quite well there. The road actually looking quite empty. So if you're making your way through Forest Road, you are good to go. Let's perhaps take a look at Mombasa Road, which is where we are right now. Traffic is moving quite slow headed into town as we speak. That is just about the Barclays Plaza there. And finally, let's take a look at Ngong Road. Traffic on Ngong Road, you can see from a distance heading to town, quite a bit of traffic there as well. So you might want to have an early start if you're headed to work. More traffic updates coming to you live right here on Morning Express. But for now, let's get back into the political point.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And now back on the political point. And just to mention, we also have a guest who's joined us, John Kagusha, who's a governance expert, joining us now. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And well, we're looking at the political point and the phone lines are now open. So if you'd like to give us a call and weigh in on the subjects that we have here this morning, you're welcome and free to do so. John, welcome. And maybe let me start from you. We're looking at the Jubilee manifesto that was launched yesterday and basically just trying to see whether it is a repackaged manifesto of 2013 that has been tweaked here and there. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, definitely. You didn't expect the Jubilee to depart 100% from what they had put forward in 2013. because they seem to have quite a heavy agenda in 2013. And one would be expecting that Uhuru Kenyatta in his 10 years would be looking at how he is going to implement the whole agenda which he had. Also now because if he was to get the position again as the President of the Republic of Kenya, then he would be now in the legacy years. So he would be trying to shape a legacy which then can be talked about many years to come by different generations.
Okay.
And what I would also want to point out on the issues of manifestos is that in Kenya, as much as very many people do not rely on manifestos to vote in their leaders, it has become a very important tool in how governance is carried out in Kenya today. Because if you look at the manifesto which we had with Mwai Kibaki in 2002, whereby the issue of free primary education was one of the major issues in the manifesto. And then when the government came into power, they took a lot of time to come up with the government policies that ensured that was implemented. And if you look at even some of the benefits you're having today, like the SGR, if you look at the issue of electricity, all these are based in the manifestos. Because you see what happens is when the government comes into power, they give these manifestos to their cabinet, and they ensure that whatever policies and laws that are passed are in line, even the budgets which are being prepared.
Okay. Allow me to pause you because I want to take a call, and we'll look at the importance of manifestos and how Kenyans should weigh a manifesto against reality, because we have empty promises that we get from politicians. But let me first of all take a call from Evans Makori in Dagoretti North. Good morning, Evans. Thank you for calling. To your question or comment. Evans Makori from Dagoretti North. Hopefully we have you on phone. To your question or comment. All right, we'll take another call from Kemboy in Kapsabet. Good morning, Kemboy in Kapsabet.
Good morning, Michael.
Yes, to your question or comment, please.
My comment about the manifesto. Yes, one of my observations, Michael, is that we can have the best manifesto in the country every time, but without values that back up the same manifesto, we are not going to achieve it, you know?
Okay.
Getting me? You know, we can have the best manifesto, but without values, we are not going to achieve it. One of the things that I heard yesterday people talking about is that the Jubilee government may not have achieved so much of what they promised because of so many court cases, so many impediments, the ICC issue. You know, we don't have to go to court to arbitrate what we need to do. Let us just do the right thing. In terms of tendering, you know, I heard somebody saying, look for the laptops. There was a court case that stopped the laptops from being implemented, so therefore it was not implemented in the right manner. But the problem is procurement. Why did we have to do the wrong thing in procuring in the first place? So we blame ourselves. We do the manifesto gets implemented. We do the wrong thing, and we battle out with court cases in trying to sneak out some corrupt deals to implement our manifesto. So one of the other things that I observed in the Jubilee government is that you start a project, it's a very good project that actually has been promised to the people, but you want to use the same project, you know, to become a cash cow.
All right.
I'm looking at the Sirigi bridge yesterday.
Okay. All right, Kemboy, I think we've got the point there. Thank you very much. Let me take another call from Ronald Chungi, who's calling from Makindo. Good morning, Ronald. To your question or comment.
Yes. Morning to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yes, I want to contribute to the current motion.
Yes, go right ahead.
That is being in the TV about Jubilee manifesto. It is a good one, but the problem with the Jubilee government is that there's been a lot of corruption, and this is what we expected them to address. They have given us very good things that we have enjoyed seeing, but corruption is the entrance to the Jubilee manifesto. The other problem is that Kenyans are suffering. Look at in the medical sector. Nurses are on strike. People are dying. No salaries for these nurses. It seems as if everything is going on its own.
Okay.
Nothing is, yes.
All right.
Nothing is being addressed.
All right. Thank you very much, Ronald from Makindu. Keep your calls coming. Let me come back to you, John Kagushia. And as a governance expert, possibly the importance of a manifesto, and not just a manifesto as a word or a document that is just out there to appease the electorate, but how important it is that we should be using that as a benchmark for any government. And we'll soon come to possibly what the opposition NASA is offering on the table, one of those being free education as soon as they get into government. If they do get into government in August, by September, they have promised that they will have free education. But let me just take a call first before I come back to you on that. And the call from Jonah in Bungoma. Good morning, Jonah.
Habari yangu ni mzuri sana.
Mzuri kabisa.
Yes.
Endelea.
Ningependa kusema namna hivi. Hizi manifesto kwanza, hii manifesto ya Jubilee wamelaunch jana. Hii Jubilee hii manifesto iko na makosa sana, kwa sababu ukiangalia laini ya kwanza wakati walitoa 2013 walisema within 90 days of the first 90 days of their ruling watakuwa wameangalia maneno ya hospitali zitakuwa pili. Wakakuja wakasema watakuwa wameangalia maneno ya vijana, watapata kazi na mikopo. Sasa jana ninaona wameongeza kusema watacreate kazi, na iliali zile promise walitoa 2013 hawajatekeleza. Ningewaomba kwanza watekeleze zile promise ambazo walitoa 2013. Second point, ukiangalia kama vitu ya kuzindua miradi hivi, unaona saa hizi mahali wanaenda, unaona wanazindua miradi. Mahali wanaenda wanazindua miradi. Na shangaa kwa nini miaka yote walikuwa wakitawala wako wakizindua miradi, sasa hii wakati wa kampeni ndio wanazindua miradi.
Asante sana Jonah. Let's take the last call before we come back to the panel. Joash Chepkwon in Lodwar. Joash?
Yes, habari ya asubuhi.
Mzuri kabisa.
Ya mimi ya sasa swali langu. Hello.
Endelea tunakusikia.
Ya swali langu manifesto ya Jubilee ni nzuri sana. Na Europe wataitekeleza. Na wale wengine wa NASA kwa wakati huu nafikiria wana criticize, wanasema Jubilee wangefanya hivi. Kwa maoni yangu tutongojea kwanza sote mbili ndio tuanze kujadiliana, tuone ni gani mzuri ni gani mbaya.
Okay.
Kwa upande wa daraja ile ambayo ilianguka jana, nafikiria ni ile tu hali ilikuwa inafanywa haraka kwa sababu ni wakati wa kupiga kura, watu waone daraja inatengenezwa. Nafikiria haikupatiwa time ile ambayo inatakika ndio ikauke vizuri, ndio hata iendelee kwa step nyingine. So ni ile tu kuharakisha ndio watu waone daraja inaendelea, wapige kura.
Okay. Asante sana. Let me come back to the panel. And one of the things that's running across all the questions and those comments that are coming in alludes to what I'd mentioned, John Kagushi, and this is in regards to the importance of a manifesto. Politicians are accused and are known of coming up with very nice documents and presentations to promise Kenyans and woo Kenyans, but how do we gauge that?
You know, the only challenge that happens is that manifestos are usually done in a political way, and of course the implementation is also based on politics. Now, some of the issues that you hear being raised by the Wananchi, and of course you expect more issues to be raised when NASA launched their manifesto today, because some people will dismiss, others will embrace. And this really in Kenya, it will depend so much on what political leaning you have. But I would want to warn Kenyans, or I would like to admonish our friends and our citizens, before we trash any of these documents, let us interrogate these documents a little bit more, because they are serious documents, I dare say. If you look at, for example, the manifesto that was there in 2013, it has consistently informed the Jubilee agenda during the reign of Uhuru Kenyatta. And they have continued to appraise themselves almost every year. If you look at the time that Uhuru had gone to Aberdare, in some hotel I think is in Nanyuki, Mount Kenya hotel there. He had gone there with the cabinet and they were appraising their manifesto. If you look at, he had another meeting at in Naivasha with his cabinet. Again, they were praising that manifesto. He has also had many conferences at State House, you know, devolution conference.
Giving more or less a scorecard.
Yeah, a scorecard. And you know, those kind of meetings and conferences that has been taking place in government, they have been on the issue of how manifesto is being implemented. If you look at also the many policies that government has put in place, if you look at also the parliamentary, I mean the legislation that has also been put in place, it has been so much around the manifesto that was launched in 2013. So that's why I'm saying, as Kenyans, we need to interrogate these manifestos a little bit more and even ensure that our input is also considered, because then they also inform how government is run in coming days, whether it is the Jubilee government, whether it is NASA government, or any other government that comes into place. Whatever manifesto they are going to put in place is going to inform how they are going to run government. And we have seen it being practical in Kenya. You can't dismiss these manifestos and say they are not useful. Or you even say that, for example, like the Jubilee government has not accomplished what they had raised in the manifestos. You know, it is true, they may not have accomplished 100%. But if you look at a lot of the things that today we are having as a country, the issues of connections to electricity, the issues of SGR, the issues of the cash transfer, the issues of even the infrastructure. I mean, all these things, if you look at them, you will relate them back to the manifestos that they implemented in 2013. So it is very important that we give these documents a lot of seriousness.
All right.
Well, you know, Mike, when we are coming up with manifestos in Kenya for our political parties, the sad reality is that these manifestos are put together by a political elite within Jubilee and within NASA. There's no public participation. And it's not surprising that a majority of the Jubilee supporters yesterday, when they went to Kasarani, they had not had an opportunity to look at the manifesto. They probably, even as we speak right now, they don't have the contents. They don't know the contents. They have not socialized with the contents because they did not participate. And the same thing is going to happen. The same situation is going to obtain with the NASA this evening. Majority of the NASA supporters, when they go for their manifesto launch, they have no idea what is contained in. And I think for us to make progress as a country, we must have shared national values. And in my view, a good manifesto should derive its origin from Vision 2030 and from our Constitution. You know, our Constitution lays out the bare minimum. Like, for instance, housing. It says that every Kenyan is supposed to have access to affordable housing of a certain quality. So when we have those kind of manifestos, then it will be, we can easily say that it now captures and retains the aspiration of the people. But beyond the manifestos being a global picture, when you're speaking to Wanjiku or the people who are calling in, how do they know that this manifesto has been a success? They know that a manifesto has been a success when they look at two levels. Number one, a good manifesto is supposed to lower your cost of living and increase your disposable income. So this manifesto counts for nothing if at the end of the day, when you go back home and you are trying to sort out your kitchen table economics, it doesn't add up. For instance, and it would be interesting if Irungu can confirm this, that if somebody has got a patient today, is it actually the case that you can take this patient to a public hospital, they'll get a VIP treatment, high-quality treatment, and you will take the patient, now this time around not a patient, you will take the person home, and you will have not paid a coin for any medical care. And I think those are the parameters. Now, when you talk about these massive investments, it would be interesting for Jubilee to tell us, when we took over, these are the projects which were started by Kibaki and Raila that we've taken to completion, and these are the projects we started on our own that we've taken to completion. For instance, it would have been very interesting that this manifesto launch was done at a stadia which had been put up by the Jubilee administration. You recall they had promised us 5 stadia. Yeah.
Right.
So it would have been interesting that this launch would have taken part in that stadium. But more important, we need to look at Article 10 of our Constitution and Chapter 6. What has Jubilee done to raise the integrity bar in Kenya and national inclusivity? Because those are some of the issues that people keep on asking and they're not getting the answers. And finally, when you come to corruption, how many billionaires and millionaires have we minted as a result of these procurement-led decision-making process? And you know, it's on record, President Kenyatta admitting that corruption is actually domiciled at the office of the president. So one would have expected that on issues of governance, and Kagusha spoke about that, have we eliminated corruption? The head of the public service is on record as having said that a third of our budget goes to corruption. So when you've admitted that a third of our budget goes to corruption, what have we done to eliminate it?
I think there are a number of questions there that Irungu Kang'ata needs to answer, and that is in regards to the scorecard and some of the things Jubilee claims to have done, yet glaringly they are not there. He's mentioned Stadia. We can look at corruption. Although I see even in the new manifesto now, we've talked about, the Jubilee has talked about governance. And responsible governance. But when we look at what has been happening, then, of course, there are many question marks left.
No, the government has considered some areas it has not achieved each and every promise it made in 2013. For instance, the issue of the stadium. It is true. We are yet to build those stadiums. Although, by the way, personally, I belong to a school of thought we ought to even not to build them. Be that as it may. There are other areas that we have achieved in a very good manner. And again, the manifesto of Jubilee is predicated on the Constitution and also on the Vision 2030, contrary to what my colleague here is saying. I'm going to give you a good example. Take the issue of education. In the Constitution, Article 53 on the rights of the children, you'll see the whole concept that every child is entitled to free primary education. And in that regard, from 2013 to now, the government has been increasing the capitation, the amount of money that has been sent to primary school under that notion. And also, again, the right to health is also a constitutional principle. Pursuant to that, the government has been increasing the money that is sent to NHIF and also urging the citizenry to increase their contribution. And also, as a result, we have about 6 million people under NHIF cover, which translate at an average of 3 persons per each household. So we are talking about 18 million Kenyans who are now under a health insurance cover. And therefore, and also when we talk about the so-called Vision 2030 policy document that was developed by the former President Mwai Kibaki, you will see what we used to call the flagship projects, which were the mirrors or the key anchor projects under that blueprint. They have been commenced, and some of them they are on course of being finished. And a good example for sure is the so-called SGR. It was a Vision 2030 project. It was conceived by Kibaki, we agree. But then again, in terms of implementation, Uhuru Kenyatta has delivered within the set time frame of about 4 or 3 years. Again, you will also look at how many roads were envisioned to be tarmacked under the Vision 2030.
Okay.
We are now tarmacking so many roads. So therefore, it shows that indeed our government is adhering to the concept we call perpetual succession of government. You take the projects of the former government, you finish them, and then you proceed to build on that good framework. And I foresee within that framework, I think Jubilee deserves a re-election.
And I imagine you would say that, of course, being somebody who's in Jubilee. Let me come to you, John Kagushia, and this is for the benefit of the electorate.
Yeah.
We have politicians giving us promises, and this is now across the whole, with all the presidential candidates that we have. How can we measure what they can do beforehand? And I say this because, like I mentioned earlier, we do have the NASA brigade promising that by September, education is going to be free right from nursery to secondary education. Is that practical? Is there machinery that is required, for instance, for that to be made practical? Or is it something that if that president at that time declares that this should be done, it will be done regardless?
Yeah, probably just before I answer that question, I just want to highlight on the issue of the health. And it's important to say some of these things for the benefit, again, of the wananchi. Because sometimes people have thought, I am too informed because, the information I have is special, or rather I'm getting some favors in some of these institutions. In our family, we have had to cancel 2 harambees. There's a harambe for a young baby who had gone to India. And we cancelled that harambe because the cost was about 3 million for the treatment of the heart. And the harambe, we cancelled it last minute because NHIF chipped in and paid the whole bill. This weekend...
So was the surgery done locally?
The surgery was done. No, it was done in India.
But NHIF...
It could not have been done here in Kenya.
Okay.
So the baby was actually flown to India.
And these are incidences you're talking about in your own family?
No, this is my cousin.
Okay.
And when I talk about these people who know me and know our family, of course, they know what I'm saying.
They can validate what you're saying.
Now, this weekend, again, if you check at look at my WhatsApp, you'll see again, we cancelled another harambe for a baby, for a young lady who is supposed to go through a brain surgery at Kenyatta National Hospital, private wing. Because they had said, you will pay 200,000 shillings, but everything else will be catered for by NHIF. But again, we went again there and wrote to NHIF and requested them, can we have these also catered for the 200,000 for the private wing. And again, NHIF has accepted, and they have cleared that bill again. And so again, even though we had already started a contribution, we had to cancel that Harambee again this weekend. So that tells you that these things, and I want the common mwananchi to know that, so that so long as you're a member of NHIF, then you know how much access and how much assistance you can get, so that we don't always dismiss everything. Now, these are real life cases which anyone can pick on. Now, I would want to say that when it comes to the issues of the manifestos, if you look at all the people who are, especially the two main coalitions now, which are going for the top seats in government, or who want to form government now, all of them have been very much involved in governance in this country. And so all of them are as much as, as it is, responsible for where we are as a country. If you look at the government which we had up to 2013, Raila Odinga was a prime minister. His deputy was Uhuru Kenyatta. And of course, Ruto was a senior government minister. We also had Musalia Mudavadi, who was a deputy to Raila Odinga. We also had Kalonzo Musyoka, who was a deputy to Mwai Kibaki, who was a president. So if you look at the people who won top seats in this country, all of them have participated in terms of governance. So if we have succeeded as a country, I wouldn't want to say that any one of them have not contributed to the success that we have. If we say that we have had a failure as a country, we of course, all these leaders may have contributed to that. Now, the issue of Vision 2030 and the new constitution that we got in 2010, they come very, very handy in terms of these manifestos that we are having. As a matter of fact, it will be absurd to see anyone coming with a manifesto which is not so similar, or similar to an extent of about 80% to all the other manifestos. I mean, like aligned. Jubilee manifesto should be almost similar to NASA manifesto up to 80%. Maybe how they articulate it is what is different. Because then these manifestos are based on Vision 2030. These manifestos are based on the Constitution 2010. I went to Nigeria some times ago, and one of the main complaints I got from there is that their leaders start projects, and when they leave office, the leaders who come have to start new projects and disregard the old ones. And for that reason, they do not build on a foundation. And so you find the country has fragmented development, and you can't relate 1 + 1, and you can't build on any other project. But in Kenya, we are lucky because we have a good plan. We have a roadmap as a country where we want to be. Okay. And so we expect every government that comes and every manifesto that is done then must be founded on those structures that have already been laid. Okay. And so that's why you find even the NASA manifesto that will come today, it will be so similar to what Jubilee may have done or may have given us yesterday. Only that maybe a few issues of articulation could be a bit different.
All right, I'll come back to you. But at this point, we want to release KTN home because Life and Style is just about to begin. But for those of us on KTN News, we continue with this conversation. We want to come back and have our closing comments from the panel, then also hand over to Michelle, who's going to be giving us your reactions on social media. So keep them coming as we prepare for the closing comments. But for now, we release KTN home for Life and Style. Goodbye. Dismas, we have the... Okay, and include your closing comments on that because we're also winding up. And I know you want to give a rebuttal to what John said. No.
To me, I want to answer your question regarding education. Is it feasible? I want to confirm that any country that has developed, it must have invested a lot of its resources on education and not on salaries. It is on what we call the key component of education. A good example is like the so-called the Asian tigers, that is China, Taiwan, Japan, for instance. Even countries which appear poor, but in terms of their living conditions, they tend to be quite ranked very highly. You will see the reason why they are usually ranked very highly by various United Nations developmental reports is usually because of their key investments in education. A good example is like Cuba. It usually ranks very highly in terms of
the
health, for instance, and other parameters. And it has everything to do with education. So therefore, the issue of whether it is affordable or not affordable, to me, is neither here or there in regard to that Jubilee pledge regarding free day secondary school education. It is a must. Why? One, we are going to increase what we call a transition rate. That is, how many students have done their KCPEs, radiate, how many of them are transiting into primary school. We must ensure we have 100% transition rate. And that can only be achieved by ensuring we have a free day secondary school education. That's number one. Number two, again, we have this obsession with so-called boarding schools in secondary school. Again, when you look at the Western Europe experience, you'll see they have very few boarding schools. About 90-something% of their schools tends to be day school. So therefore, we need to strengthen the so-called day schools. We invest more into them because the cost per pupil of educating that children tends to be quite low compared with the boarding segments. And therefore, I strongly believe Jubilee will be able to achieve that, and we need to send more resources into it, because by doing that, we are going to have a more educated workforce. We are going to have people who can be able to integrate into the so-called global emerging knowledge-based education system.
Okay.
Yes, so therefore I support, and I think we are going to achieve that goal.
All right, Dismas, your closing comments, and as we look, and maybe just to hear what you say, what John had mentioned, that NASA's manifesto may not be that different from Jubilee, given that they're all anchored on Vision 2030.
Well, there's no creativity in developing manifestos in Kenya. They're done by political party elites, and all of them read from the same hymn book. The original manifesto in Kenya was done by James Orengo and Professor Nyang' Nyong'o. So they keep it, they delete, they keep on having mutations of that. But you know, the true test of a successful manifesto is how it affects you as an individual, as a person back at home. And the question we would be asking ourselves with the Jubilee manifesto, say they've been in office for 5 years later. As a Kenyan, is your life better off 5 years later, from the time Jubilee took office and now? If you compare your bank finances, you compare your socioeconomic lifestyle, are you better off 5 years later? Another thing that we may need to address, and CS Adan Mohamed spoke about it, about the ease of doing business in Kenya. Now one wonders, if it's so easy to do business in Kenya, and Kenya is growing at the trajectory that Honorable Irungu talks about, how come you have so many multinationals closing shop in Kenya and going to other markets? How come the cost of energy in Kenya is much higher compared to our neighbors, South Africa and even Zimbabwe? So what one would have expected yesterday, when the president says that we have energy security, is to compare the cost of energy in Kenya with our neighbors and tell us, as a result of lowering the cost of energy, we've had so many companies coming to Kenya. And it's okay for a number of the multinationals to close shop in Kenya and go to other economies, but what's the net effect? How many companies have come to Kenya and how many companies have relocated? Those are some of the tangible figures. Because, you know, the politicians are given to over-promising and under-delivery. That's the order of the politicians. I will not be surprised if a politician tells you, I'm going to put a bridge somewhere where there's even no need for a bridge. But at the end of the day, if you're a middle-class person living in Kileleshwa, how has this manifesto affected your mortgage repayments? If you want to take your kids to good schools, must you take your kids to a private school because the public schools are not solid? Those are some of the questions we need to keep asking ourselves. But fundamentally speaking, is the issue of national inclusivity, Article 10, does Jubilee reflect the face of Kenya? You know, that's a big issue, and that's a question people have been asking. And also the issue of corruption. Joseph Kinyo himself said that corruption in Kenya is a nightmare. If you're able to manage corruption, then giving Kenya energy security, food security would be a walk in the park.
Okay. John Kagushi, your closing comments?
Yeah, indeed. You know, my friend has raised the issue of corruption, and I would say the issue of corruption has not been a nightmare in Kenya, either in Jubilee government regime or because of Jubilee government regime. I think we have had a problem of corruption for as long as we have been here. And I mean, we as also Kenyans, also is a time that we must also take our stand on some of those issues and ensure that we also demand you know, integrity in governance in Kenya. It is very, very important. Again, when we look at the issue of feasibility of these manifestos, it is possible to know as early as now whether manifesto is will be implemented or not. Because, for example, if you pledge that you're going to give free education for all kids who go to secondary school, whether in day school or in boarding school, practically speaking, Mike, you know, it will be at a very high cost if you pay accommodation, for example, for all the university students or even for all the high school kids, what does that mean for our country? It means then that you're going to probably use as much money as we are giving to the counties to handle the issue of education. Then that would be at what cost? You cannot then say that you're going to handle the issue of a free secondary school accommodation, plus you also handle the development agenda of the country. So I think if anyone is pledging maybe free tuition for high schools, that would be okay, that would be acceptable. But if you pledge even accommodation, then that would be questionable, because then that would be a bit difficult to implement. Okay. And then, of course, as a country, I think we are moving forward as a country. It's good to always give hope, because again, we also are in the family of the international community, and we have been graded very well as a country on the ease of doing business. We have come so far from, I think, position 100 and something. Now we are coming all the way to position 80s. The issue of investment in the country, Kenya now has become one of the most attractive investment destination from all the investors abroad. So I think these are some of the things that we have to keep celebrating as a country, because our country is not Jubilee and it is not NASA.
All right,
Kenya
I think we'll have to wind it up there because of time. I know Dismas, you have something to say, but time is up and we need to get some feedback from social media, which I want to hand over to Michelle to just give us some of that information that has been coming through social media as we wind up the political point. Michelle.
Quite a lot going on social media, Michael, this morning under the hashtag Morning Express KTN. So let's have a look at what people are saying about the conversation that you've just had on the political point. Robert Akech here says, and this is also a response to the question of the day we're asking you this morning. We're asking you, did the Jubilee manifesto launched last night meet your expectations? And Robert Akech here says, yes, Jubilee government delivered in creating 1 million jobs, but they were for the Chinese. So that's his take. And Art Employed here says, projects that they did was their responsibility. They should show us what projects they went out of their way to do for Kenyans. Faustin Govu, a new manifesto, old one not fully implemented yet. This Hururuto thing is a total waste of time. We have Amara Gibbs here says, if you fail an exam and you're given the same exam again without revising, how will you pass that exam? Quite a lot really going on. Neil Nguru, however, says, I can testify that I had 2 surgeries in January 2016 and not a single cent paid. NHIF actually works. Karanja Wangare, I hear anyone praising the Jubilee government, and I'm left wondering whether there is a new Kenya somewhere that we don't know about. Hashtag Kangata. So he's speaking there to Irungu Kangata. Neil Nguru also says the laptop project is still on. We have seen laptops being manufactured and delivered. So a plus there for the Jubilee government. And as we wind up, Alan says the fact remains that the Kenya of today is much better than the Kenya of 2012. Yanusu Mkate, from health to roads, all of them are excellent. Neil also says all the leaders of Jubilee and NASA have contributed to the failure of this country. So quite a heated conversation there going on social media. Do keep your thoughts and comments coming in, of course. But this brings us to a close on our conversation on the political point this morning. We take a short break now. It is 7 minutes past the hour. The show is not over yet. We'll be back shortly with news making headlines this hour.